So, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, thank you so much for speaking to us on Times Now's Turning the Page. You've been a former ambassador to Germany, a former ambassador to Ethiopia, the African Union, ASEAN, as well as Indonesia. And you've had an extensive experience in the Ministry of External Affairs, 37 years. And you've come out with this book, The Harambee Factor, India-Africa Economic and Development Partnership. And I think this would be an excellent primer to anybody interested in the evolution of the Indo-African relationship from 1947 onwards. And I think it's a great contribution to that literature on the books that have come out on Indo-African ties. So thank you very much for speaking to me, sir.
Thank you, Siddharth, and thank you for bringing this book to light.
Let me begin, sir, and let me begin with something that you write in the book. You say, and I quote, in 2002, in an effort to give more focus to Africa, the Africa division was split. It had been one of the graveyard divisions, with anyone posted there being the subject of speculations as to where they had erred or why they had fallen in disfavor, stop quote. So, sir, from the high of championing anti-colonial movements in Africa, both before and after our independence, or even for that matter, leading the boycott of apartheid South Africa, what went wrong in India's priorities vis-a-vis Africa thereafter?
Well, when you have priorities, one is the political level. So, like Mahatma Gandhi is a permanent source of inspiration for India-Africa. It has nothing to do with the Ministry of External Affairs. So the Ministry of External Affairs has to creatively design programs to take the legacy forward, but in a contemporary manner. You can't keep living. I think somewhere else in the book I have said that Mahatma Gandhi, counter-terrorism, permanent seat on the Security Council were three mantras that we followed in our Africa policy. But these mantras also need to change. Now, somewhere that contemporization of policy took a long time. So in the book, what I have tried to show that this graveyard division came to life and it brought new avenues of cooperation. And in 2002, also the African Union was born. And we were invited to be partners of it from there on. So even if we didn't want to take Africa seriously, they were taking us very seriously. So we had to come down from the political level into what I call the functional cooperation level. And that is why when you see the chapter on the evolution of India's foreign Africa policy from 2002 to 2006, you actually see so much starts happening. Looks sporadic, but ultimately it had a milieu around it. Regain our engagement with Africa in a post-Cold War period.
In fact, continuing on, now there was a renewed focus on Africa, sir, after Narendra Modi became Prime Minister in 2014. Now, as you write in your book, there have been 29 bilateral visits from India over the last 8 years to the African continent. This is including Prime Minister Modi's visits, as well as, of course, the President and the Vice President and others. So since you've seen from very close quarters how this relationship has now grown, what are the areas that you believe that still need addressing?
Under Prime Minister Modi, one of the first things they did was to fill the political gaps, in the sense that there were many countries which had never seen even a junior minister or a senior official go there. So they filled those gaps by making sure that at least some minister went to every African country. Then they made sure that the high-level visits, president, vice president, went to many countries. And what I'm happy to say, that despite COVID, which put a setback to this, now I notice that this plan of visits is actually coming back to life. And there are more visits planned and are happening. So that significance of engaging the African countries at political level is clear. The second part is Prime Minister Modi puts a lot of energy into his foreign policy initiatives. And when he visited Uganda in 2018, and he enunciated in their parliament this 10-point Indian-African policy. So it was not new, but the articulation was very clear. So therefore, what he did in one go was bring what we had been doing. After all, he had done a very successful India-Africa summit in 2015. So results of that were brought in, the history was brought in, and what I call the contemporarization, like blue economy and things that were all brought in.
Let me quote from your book once again, sir. And you write, and I quote, the book also refrains from making any comparison with China or any other partner nation of Africa. Since India is not perceived as a challenge to other countries with stakes in Africa, few resources, if any, are committed to study the Indian role in Africa. Mostly it emerges in literature in comparison with China, stop quote. So Ambassador is saying, why is it that you steer clear of this binary in your book?
You know, whenever you want to study India and Africa, mostly what you will get out of a website is studies on China and a little bit of a comparison to India. There's very little independent study of what India does in Africa. And this is because we were seen as a benign power. The United States, the UK and others did not see us as a challenge, but China was the challenge. So much work was done on studying China. It still is. And China's statistics are all opaque on what they do. Similarly, the Europeans, who are the big colonial powers in Africa, also did not see us as a challenge. They never took us seriously. Therefore, this book tries to steer clear of such comparisons. And following what one of my friends in the African Union once told me, yes, China does more, but India does better. So that better is what I am trying to bring out, because I think that is not known. India does a lot in Africa. Much of it is private sector. Much of it is social and civil society, which I have today tried to put into this book and bring them out, which I believe is the first time that we are actually bringing this out in such detail.
Yeah, in fact, it's a treasure trove of information, sir. All the facts and figures that you've managed to accumulate and so, properly depict in graphics and figures. I think it serves as an excellent education for anyone wanting to acquaint himself or herself with the Indo-African relationship. And since you mentioned that in comparison with China, even if China might do more, we are doing better. How are we doing better, sir? If you could just give us a perspective.
I think three things need to be noted in this. Let's take the economic side first, trade. Now, Europe and America deal with Africa on preferential trade access, whereas India and China have very limited preferential trade access. We have the DFTP, duty-free tariff preferential scheme. It's a limited scheme. But despite the fact that India and China don't have preferential tariff arrangements, we are the top two trading partners of Africa. So India managed to overcome this deficit of trade preferences and have a huge trade with Africa, which is an achievement. And today, India, China, and France are the three top. Every year, China remains one, but 2 and 3 rotates between India and France. That is one. The second part is that India's human resource development and capacity building based approach essentially said that it is not the natural resources of Africa, but the human resources of Africa which are important and need to be cultivated. And if you cultivate them, given the fact that they too have a youthful median age for their people, this will prevent terrorism and poverty. So if you want to achieve your SDGs, educate your youth and make them capable. This was the Indian approach in many ways. And the third part, which was different, was that the incentive to private sector in India, our trade, most of our investment, all private sector led. So I think these three issues made our set us aside from other partners of Africa, many of them who subsequently then tried to emulate us.
So, focusing on one particular aspect of our economic engagement in Africa, it's the line of credit system or the LOC, which you devote a significant amount of attention to in your book. Now, it's an important instrument in our economic engagement with Africa. How much of it have we actually managed to leverage in terms of also getting African support on key issues as far as India is concerned?
So there are roughly 3 periods of the LOC system. The first is the fledgling system, 2003-4 to 2008, before the India-Africa summit, where it is sporadic. Then from 2008, India-Africa summit, when there is a huge surge in allocations and expenditure. And then there is the post-2015 period. Now, the most important period was the second one, the period of the 3 India-Africa Forum Summits, in which Indian lines of credit went into 41 different African countries. And when they went, it took Indian businesses with them. So they were the ones executing the projects. So India, through the concessional credits, went into a large number of countries where you could never imagine Indian footprint economically. And many of them in Central Africa, French West Africa, we were never there. So I have shown which countries did not borrow from India and why. They were not political reasons. In that period, we could reach out to these countries whom we had lent to and build bilateral relationships. I think somewhere in the book I have mentioned that during this period, India was a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. And for the first time, there was coordination between the permanent mission of India in New York and the Africa division to see where our priorities were, who were we dealing with, who could we talk to, so these linkages could be established. Third part is the, let's say, post 2017 onward. Africa starts facing debt stress, which means they stop borrowing and they instead start looking for investment. So this is what I pointed out, that the period of the LOCs has sort of diminished. Many countries, if you who asked for LOCs were allocated, ultimately never signed on in this 2017-19 period. They are all in the pipeline. And once the COVID came, then they were looking for write-offs or rescheduling and not borrowing more. So I think the line of credit system worked very well for us. But today, the African countries don't have the capacity to borrow with sovereign credit. So therefore, we have to find new ways or imaginative ways to deal with them economically. And I have tried in the book to bring forth the post line of credit thinking on how we should engage, putting the private sector in the front.
And what can the private sector do more in order to deepen its presence in Africa and come out with a blueprint or a relationship that is sustainable in the long run in a post LOC scenario?
The private sector of India has essentially led the FDI into Africa. $54 billion of FDI in Africa, as my book shows, is mainly private sector. I've analyzed country by country, project by project. What did the big companies do? What did the small companies do? In some places, there are big companies like, the Tatas, the Airtel acquisitions, the Godrej acquisitions. But in many countries, as my book shows, there are a very large number of SMEs. And the RBI statistics show this, that in so-and-so country, so many $1 million went, but nobody has a record who these companies are. My research shows these were all Indian SMEs. So SMEs are a big component, but they need support to expand. Now, in order to understand what this requires, I did a survey among companies who are working with Africa. This is, I think, one of the 2 surveys in the book. In this, all the companies who participated were not LOC beneficiaries. Many of them were clearly not utilizing LOC. So their views were important. So when I encapsulated those answers, we understood that some are generic reasons, that there is a exchange rate risk, there's political risk, there are domestic issues, and these are common to all. But there are certain things like the role of Indian banks. Everybody says the Indian bank should do more. And if you see the rest of the book, it actually shows Indian banks are doing less and actually withdrawing from Africa. So this is a contradiction. Now, somebody needs to address this. Similarly, it's easy to say, let us do PPP models. But PPP models don't always work. How do you do them? So one of the ways that the many Indian businessmen complained that to get credit in Africa from African institutions for local cost is extremely expensive. So one of the suggestions I have made is, why can't we have a rotating fund which you give as a line of credit to Indian banks or big African banks and say, we will subsidize the rate through a low cost lending and you reduce your cost of lending to Indian investors. Another way was that many projects don't get done because there are no bankable reports to implement. The Africa Investment Forum has trillions of dollars of projects, but how many actually get done? They don't. It's because there is nobody investing in preparing what are called detailed project reports. This costs money. So another suggestion I made was that let us set up a grant fund which will fund Indian consulting companies who will then go and do these studies. Once the studies get converted to projects, that money can be returned to the fund, or they'll be paid by the project. But at least the working capital would be provided. So suggestions like this have been made, keeping in view that the Africa Continental FTA, which has come into force, actually incentivizes investments in regional markets of Africa, which is an Indian lead story. Indian investors have always been the best for domestic and regional trade in Africa. And therefore, we must support them into that. And I think this is what my book, I hope, will contribute to an understanding.
Coming to another facet of India's economic relationship with Africa, and that is energy security. Now, India's emphasis for a very long time has been to diversify its own energy basket and even reliance on a select group of countries for our energy needs, particularly the import of oil. Tell us a bit about our energy engagement with Africa and how diversification is also a very intrinsic part of that relationship.
For I think 3 or 4 times we did what is called the India-Africa Hydrocarbons Conference. And I was present perhaps in 3 of them. These were very important to set the ball rolling with Africa when Africa was not one of our primary sources of energy. But we understood from them that while they had the oil, they often did not have downstream and upstream capacities. So it was up to us whether we would go. But I think in the early part of the book period, we also did not have the capacities to invest in huge pipelines and evacuation. So we had to wait for others. But I think over a period of time, we started in buying more oil, particularly from West Africa, Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, Angola, and things like that. And as Uganda and Kenya had small amount, we could get in there. This all suddenly meant that firstly, our total trade expanded. And secondly, Africa trade surplus became much bigger than us. The traditional relationship was that the primary trading partner was East Africa altered. West Africa became mainly because of oil exports. Now you see a country like Mozambique, which is strategically important for India, has become one of the core receptors of Indian investments in coal, in gas, and now in evacuation. So I think a lot is happening because of energy into that area. And once you realize that this has become an alternate source of energy from South and Western Africa, then the sea lanes of the Western Indian Ocean acquire that much more meaning when we look at the Indo-Pacific concept. And that is where India's relationship with Seychelles, Mauritius, Mozambique, with Madagascar, has a new meaning. All the investments we did in all these years come to roost now. And I think that is something that we need to see, that Indian policy has actually thought it aloud. Okay? And today we would have, if we were to evacuate these supplies, a fairly good control over the sea lanes which come here. So for India, there is no Malacca dilemma for energy out of Africa.
That response has actually given us an opportunity to do a bit of a segue into a very strategic aspect of our relationship. Now, 13 countries have a military presence in Africa, going by what you've said in the book. France, China, Japan, and the United States have bases, military bases in Djibouti. Now, Mauritius has denied any reports that it has allowed India to build a naval base on the Agalega Island. But how do you see Africa as a theater in this multipolar world order in terms of strategic considerations?
Recently the foreign minister of Madagascar was in Delhi. And after that, I did an analysis of what he said and, how it reflects on our policy. So unlike Djibouti, which has 4 different countries who are rivals sometimes, having bases there, and they are proud of it, other African countries do not want to be seen as siding with one or the other. They want to have a universal foreign policy with friends with all. Now, I don't think they fully comprehend all the evolving nuances. So therefore, they prefer to say we are friends with everybody. But there is no doubt that India is developing not a base but facilities in Agalega, in Assumption, and we have provided coastal radar to the Seychelles, Madagascar. So we have augmented their capacities, keeping in view that all of them faced piracy and non-traditional threat. It was not an anti-China move. It was against non-traditional threats of piracy, money laundering, drug running, that we augmented and created their Coast Guard capabilities. So I am quite okay with somebody saying, no, I don't have a base. It's fine, it's not a base. We are actually creating facilities which will augment the economic development of those islands. And once those islands are inhabited and functional, we would have access to them. Now, does that stop them giving access to others? I don't know, but that is an open question.
A couple more questions, Ambassador Singh. Now, you talk about people-to-people contact, including scholarships, as well as African students studying in India, and there are a fair number of them. You write, and I quote, "There is a continuing problem of adjustment of African students in India, and worse, the attitude of many Indians towards them. We normally advise people that they should go to universities where the African student population was already large and well settled. It saddened me that we had to do this." Now, stop quote. Furthermore, now this is something that happened in 2017. On the 31st of March 2017, the heads of several African missions in India released a joint statement saying, and I quote, "The meeting unanimously agreed that those accumulated attacks," now this is following a series of attacks on African inhabitants here, "accumulated attacks against Africans are xenophobic and racial in nature," stop quote. Now, have these incidents and these kind of responses that we've received actually hurt us diplomatically with respect to our engagement with Africa?
This is an unfortunate part of our engagement. And it happens actually because this partnership actually succeeded. And so many African students kept coming here, which meant that their visibility increased. More of them would now not stay in hostels, but would hire premises. Most of them would pay more to the local landlord than others would. So there was a perception issue. The landlords were very happy. The local shop owners were very happy because these guys would spend more than Indian students. But there were reverberations when other gangs would take them on and these guys would stand up for themselves or they would be heckled. This became a problem. Now, when the problem gets accumulated through a series of issues, then the African embassies came together, went to MEA and all. I think for the last 4 years, touchwood, things have been calm. I myself live in Greater Noida, and there are so many education institutions here, and there are quite a large number of Africans because I see them in the supermarkets and the malls. They seem quite okay. And when they go, people are not laughing at them or jeering at them or mocking them. So that means there is a better acceptance in areas where they are in larger numbers. But I do remember that when we introduced the special agricultural fellowships, some of them individuals, one or two people got sent to very good Indian institutions, but in very remote locations where they were an object of interest, if not ridicule. So we had to then discuss with the agriculture ministry saying, see, scientifically this works, but social impact wise this is very bad. So let us look at metropolitan areas to accommodate them rather than methodologically say if this guy is a plant scientist, he must go to so and so.
A final question. You're wearing a shirt from Ethiopia where you served as ambassador. And when one thinks of Ethiopia, you also mentioned the fact that Jawaharlal Nehru had declared Abyssinia Day. This followed the Italian conquest of Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia. And in solidarity with the Ethiopians, Nehru had called on the rest of India to actually commemorate this as Abyssinia Day. Where do Indo-African relations now go from here, Ambassador Singh? How do you see it evolving over the next decade from now?
So this shirt is very special to me because as one of the people-to-people connects, we actually did, while I was in Ethiopia, a training program for Ethiopian designers with the help of an Indian design institute and Ethiopian Airlines. We had a contest on Republic Day where all the designers exhibited what they made, and then there was a jury and there was a popular vote, and then the winners were selected. The winners were flown by Ethiopian Airlines to India to spend a month with the Design Institute. Now, some of the winners actually came back and presented me a token of the appreciation, and this shirt was one of them. It's got an amazing Ethiopian pattern and design on the collar. They made it for me, think this is something that you will wear. So I'm extremely proud of it. So the Ethiopian Prime Minister of that time was Mr. Meles Zenawi. And I had a very good relationship with him. Unfortunately, he died too soon, in 2012. And he once told me that the re-emergence of India on the world stage is the best thing which has happened to Africa in general and Ethiopia in particular. This is in 2009, he said. That is how the Africans looked at India. Because they felt that yes, China was doing more, the Europeans were pumping in money, the Americans were telling them this, that, and the other. But African countries could not be China, they could not be Europe, they could not be America. But India, with this pluralism, its democracy, its emerging economy status, was a country they could emulate, which they thought this was a real model for them. So therefore, India was a partner, not a donor. And that is what my book title tries to show. The Harambee Factor is the factor of cooperative partnership. And I believe that is the essence of the India-Africa partnership, which we must now reinvent in modern terms.
Right. Very insightful discussion there, sir. Thank you so much for your time and congratulations once again on your book, The Harambee Factor, India-Africa Economic and Development Partnership. Much appreciated, Ambassador Singh, for speaking to me on Turning the Page.
Thank you, Siddharth. It was a very enjoyable discussion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.